If you could live the life of anyone, who would you choose? Would you choose to be a spy, a billionaire playboy, yourself? Well, don't do it. Hollywood wanted us to know that so badly that they remade a classic movie about implanting fake memories. This is 2012's Total Recall. Spoiler alert, while I might be giving you my opinion on the film, that's no substitute for watching it for yourself. Links to the film are in the description. And for those of you that need to hear this is just a movie. All stunts are for the sake of story and shouldn't be attempted on your own. Viewer discretion is advised. There's a direct line from the colony to Britain that runs straight through the planet called the Fall, and it leads the working class to and from work. To the rich living section, our man Douglas wakes up in a daze, and he finds that the room he's in is destroyed, and his partner Melina hands him a gun and tells him to get ready for resistance. Without hesitation, they rush out into the hallway and fight their way to a ledge where Douglas ends up getting restrained. Douglas promises to find Melina and he lets her go. Suddenly, he wakes up in bed. Now his wife Lori wakes up next to him and she knows that he had another nightmare. She asks him if he wants to talk about it, but he says there's nothing to talk about since it's pretty much the same dream that he always has. Lori seems to fish his mind to see if there's anyone else there. Then Lori asks if it's a metaphor for their relationship. They assure each other that they are happy with one another, and they start to get a little closer until Lori gets a page from the station for a bombing. She rushes out of the apartment, but she promises that they'll talk more about it tonight. After watching the news on the bombing, Douglas steps out onto the balcony to look out at the bustling city. Then he heads down to walk the streets. While walking around, he runs into Harry, and they hop onto a glorified shuttle that takes them through the Fall. When they go through the core and the gravity reverses, it's a really cool idea. Obviously, gravity is pulled to the center of the planet, so this makes perfect sense. But there's something about watching humans go through the shift that makes it surreal. When they get to the station, Doug asks Harry about the Rekall program where they alter your mind to make you believe you live another life. Harry warns him to stay away, and Doug gets put in charge of training the new guy, Merrick, on how to assemble the synthetic police force. Merrick tells him that there's nothing wrong with Rekall, and Doug seems to believe him. Merrick gives him a Rekall card, and he tells him to ask for Mac. When Doug goes to his boss to see about a promotion he had hoped for, he finds out that they're going with someone from the outside. Well, that seems to be the last straw. Doug takes the Fall back to the colony and he goes home. He takes a moment to watch Lori sleep, but he can't take it anymore. He heads to the bar to meet up with Harry. For it being a dystopian rundown future, this bar looks way better than half of the dive bars I've ever been in. We need to step our bar game up. Doug tells Harry that he hates his routine for crappy pay at a crappy job, and by the end of the night, Harry tells Doug that he needs to find a way to get it together. So Doug does just that. After Doug's approached by the Triple Wonder Girl, Doug heads to the Rekall office and asks for Mac. Mac tells him the possible lives that he can give him memories of, and he tells him that none of the aspects of this fake life can actually be true. Doug picks Secret Agent, and he assures Mac that there's no secret in his life. Well, that turns out not to be true, because the test catches memories of him being a spy after the drugs go into his system. Before they can shut it down, agents burst in and shoot everyone around Doug. Doug tries to tell him that he's nobody, but when he's pushed, he seems to pull out a set of skills that leaves everyone else in the room dead. When the next team arrives, Doug uses the last team's grenades to punch a hole in the wall that he uses to get to the city. Doug makes his way back to the house where Lori finishes up a phone call. Doug tells her exactly what happened after he left work, and how do you think it went? She actually seems to try and bear hug him. What could have been a really hot scene ended up being a really hot fight scene. Eventually, Doug gets the upper hand, and she tells him that she was planted to keep an eye on him, and they aren't even married. She manages to get the gun from him, and he takes to running over the rooftops to try and get away from her. She's close on his heels though. Eventually, Doug's able to slip by the other guards, and he finds out that he actually has a phone in his hand. When he answers, he hears a man named Hammond talking to him. Hammond tells him that they worked at Federal Intel again, and Doug had told him to give him a message if his phone ever came back on. The message is simply to get the key. Hammond thinks it's too dangerous to keep in touch, and he tells him to get rid of the phone. Then Doug gets a message that tells him of a security box at a bank, and Doug gets a broken bottle to cut the phone out of his hand. Again, I'm going to need some of this fancy tech. Do you know how handy it would be to have a smartphone inside of your hand? You'd never forget your phone again, and it would never die on you unless you did. No pun intended for calling it handy. When Lori gets the call from the Chancellor to capture Doug alive, she finds out who he really is, and she tells the team to ignore their orders. She tells the team to kill Doug upon sight. Meanwhile, Doug heads to the bank to retrieve the security box, and he finds it's full of money, identifications, and a data file that shows himself telling himself to go to his address. As the file finishes, it deletes itself, and Doug makes his way to the Fall. He tries to use a disguise, but he ends up failing at the security checkpoint. That's no problem for old Dougie though. This man's been in a memory coma for quite some time, but now he's got all the John Wick and James Bond moves that anyone could ever want. Just as he gets past the terminal, Laurie arrives with a squad. Doug manages to jump onto the highway with floating cars, and one of them stops to pick him up. It's none other than Melina, and Doug recognizes her from his dream. She wants to tell him all about everything, but first they have to lose Laurie and the others that are chasing them now. They end up losing their pursuers by disengaging the magnets on their car, so they crash onto the road below. Doug takes Melina to his apartment where he lays her on the daybed to rest. He then looks around the rest of the apartment for some sort of key to what his message mentioned to himself. He spots a secret compartment that has a gun, but nothing else. When he seems to give up, he sits to play the piano, but he notices that one of the keys doesn't play a sound. He dislodges the key, and he replaces it with a stick that was in a security box. After he plays the song all the way, he finds a recording of himself. Doug tells Doug to get to Matthias, because he's the only person that can help him unlock the key to bring it all down. After putting the fate of millions of people in his hands, our Doug is interrupted by Melina, who's finally awake. She tries to address him as his real name, Hauser, but Doug refuses to believe any of it. Doug thinks that it's all a fake memory, but she shows him her matching scar that came from when they got shot in the hand. Suddenly, people arrive outside, and they go on the run once again. They make it down to the lobby just in time to see the entire force outside, and Harry comes inside to try and talk some sense into Doug. This is where the movie almost got me. For a split second here, Harry almost had me convinced that he was still in Rekall. Harry was more convincing than Laurie ever was. Harry tries to convince Doug that he was chemically transfused into his mind to talk him out of his session. What gives him away is when Harry talks about calling Laurie at work, and Doug remembers that Laurie hadn't worked the night before. Harry decides to take drastic measures, and he hands his gun to Melina to prove that this is a simulated memory. Harry tries to convince Doug that he has to shoot Melina to destroy this twisted fantasy of his, and Doug almost goes through with it. He ends up shooting Harry in the head, and Laurie breaks her character of loving wife to go on the hunt for Doug as he runs back into the building with Melina. I'd be terrified to have Laurie as a wife. She runs in there like the Terminator. Why hasn't she played the villain in more movies? Also, where's my next Underworld movie? As a means of escape, Doug and Melina jump into a sideways elevator shaft that's tied to a whole bunch of buildings. I'm confused about this system, but now the building seems to be going after them. Eventually, Laurie ends up on the same elevator as Doug and Melina, and she throws them around with the help of one robot sentry. Laurie plants an explosive in the elevator before she jumps out, and she watches as Doug and Melina drop onto another elevator just in time. Doug and Melina manage to get away for now, but Laurie goes to get ready for their next encounter. Doug and Melina make their way through town to find Matthias, and they find the resistance holed up in the subway tunnel. After they turn on the subway train, they throw on gas masks since they're going through no man's land that's toxic. Doug opens up to Melina about being around so many people that seem to idolize the man he used to be. But before long, they reach their destination. Matthias has Doug come back alone, and Doug tells him that he wants to have his memories back so he can be who he really is. Matthias puts Doug in his own Rekall machine, and he uses it to venture into his mind. When they find the information they're trying to find, it turns out to be a trap set in Doug's mind. Suddenly, soldiers bombard the facility, and they take Matthias captive. Doug tries to assure them that he had no idea about any of this, but it's thanks to the trap in his head that the resistance is about to fall. Cohagen goes through all of the reasons that the plan went off as well as it did, and he gives all the credit to Doug. Then Cohagen explains that he's got Hauser's memories backed up in the system, and he'll give them back to Doug if he wants. I'm not sure I'd want my memories back at this point. Let me live in ignorant bliss by now. If anything, erase my memories some more now. Cohagen leaves the facility, and Doug realizes that Hammond is one of the guards there with him. Hammond loosens the restraint on one of Doug's arms, and Doug does what he does best. Everyone in the room gets killed, but meanwhile, Cohagen gets ready to deploy his robot army to the colony. Doug takes one of the helicopters back to Britain where he lands near the fall and makes his way through the facility. He hops on the shuttle and plants explosives all over as it goes through the planet. He goes to the passenger compartment, takes out the guards, and frees Melina, who finally kisses him. When they get to the core, the gravity reverses, and they're able to get away from the remaining guards that show up. And by get away, I mean that they went on the outside of the elevator that's going who knows how fast through the Earth's many layers. A logical escape plan. Doug ends up getting shot when they get to the roof of the elevator, and Cohagen is there to meet them. Finally, the fall arrives in the colony, and Laurie prepares to deploy the troops. Just as Cohagen gets ready to put a bullet in Doug's head, Melina pulls up in a helicopter and opens fire on the troops that are holding Doug hostage. Cohagen pops back up again, and he goes hand-to-hand with Doug until he notices that he has an explosives timer on his watch. Just then, the entire fall explodes, and Doug gets the upper hand on Cohagen. This is by far one of the most epically slow battles I've ever seen. I'm really caught up in it, but you wonder how anyone gets hit throughout the entire tussle. I mean, Cohaagen gets stabbed and I think he literally watched it from like a mile away. Now that that's over, the entire fall gets ready to fall back into the Earth's core. But Doug and Melina race to get off of it before the support brackets break. They barely make it, but their troubles aren't over just yet. Doug is unconscious, and he can hear flashes of his memories while he comes to in the back of an ambulance. Melina's there with him when he wakes up, and he thinks that this is real. Then he suddenly attacks her because she doesn't have the scar on her hand. It turns out that it was actually Lori with a face changer, and she stabs the paramedic before going after Doug in the back of the ambulance. Well, he manages to knock her out of the back of the ambulance, and the security of the colony apprehend her. Finally, Doug's able to look out at everything they just accomplished, and he sees the real Melina. He hugs her, but I wouldn't touch anyone at this point. Doug and Melina smile as they look at what they just did, and Doug gets a glimpse of a billboard that's advertising for Rekall. Then, the credits roll. For a remake that no one really ever asked for, it was rather entertaining. It didn't make you question the reality of things as much as the original, but it was definitely action-packed and entertaining. Give it a shot. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this one. Comment what you think I should watch next, and I'll see you in the next video.